I told you to be careful. I told you keep your guard up and watch what you say. I told you there'd be people that could make you trip just standing in place. You didn't believe anything that I said. When they came, you were not prepared. Then it all fell right on your head. And now you're lying in this bed. You've got yourself in a rabbit hole. You're trapped cause you did not let go. You took that bait and now you know. You've got yourself in a rabbit hole.
There we go. That was catchy. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone, for wow, we have 10 people in here already. That's a good start for these. They usually start off with lesser numbers. So thank you, everyone, for coming to another exciting episode of Poe's Magic Academy. We're building up to something big. Big secret. Everyone who's watching, please don't tell anyone.
I get to know?
You know it already. Come on.
Oh, okay.
Poe's Magic Academy is what we're talking about. We're building up to an announcement on that at some point, but so keep a lookout for that. Tonight's guest for our interview series, of course, is someone who's been on here before in our previous incarnation. David Parr. You may have heard of him. He's been on Penn and Teller Fool Us twice, and he fooled the pants off of them at least once.
They had no pants.
They had no pants. If you watch
they pantsless.
Watch it, everything's from their waist up because their pants were propelled from their legs into under. So, yep.
Hi, Stephanie.
Yep. So. And it was a great. Maybe we'll have a chance. We can bring that clip up, but probably most of the people who are watching tonight have seen that already. If you have not seen the David Parr clip, either one of them, they're both available on YouTube. And I will bring it up if you tell us in the chat. Website. I'll bring it up and you can tell us. If you haven't seen it yet, let us know. We'll bring it up in the chat, and we'll watch it live here tonight. And of course, if you come in late and miss part of this, it will be forever up on YouTube and Facebook until civilization eventually collapses into the whatever apocalyptic future we have to look forward to. But so tonight for those who have watched these before, they're kind of a free form interview. That kind of progresses organically, but we start off usually with telling the interviewee, which is David tonight, telling us a little bit about himself and what inspired him to get into magic and how that came about. So there you go.
Story.
Yeah, that's your origin story. That's right.
My origin story is pretty common among magicians, and that's that I received a magic kit as a gift when I was 7 years old. Once I had learned all the secrets that were inside that box, I had to know more. I was thoroughly hooked. So I began making regular visits to the library to take out books on the subject of magic. And then shortly after that, I discovered that there was a magic shop about 20 miles distant from the house where I grew up. And I asked my parents to take me there. And subsequently, trips to the magic store became a regular event. I'd save up my money to buy some new weird prop and learned that. And so by the time I was 11, 12, I was doing gigs. I was performing magic at, I did the local library circuit. I performed summer programs. They'd have summer programs for kids. And I was on the program performing magic, and toured and did all the libraries around the city. And from there it expanded. So, so by the time I was in high school, I was already I had spent so much time on the stage that the stage felt like home to me.
Hmm.
And it always has now.
So you started off in almost parallel in this particular way to Tony and Druzy. You start off in comedy magic.
Well,
And
it seemed like, when I went to magic conventions when I was a kid, it seemed like there were two paths you could follow. I got this from observation of watching the performers at these magic conferences. And it seemed like the two paths were you could do a manip act, like a silent manipulation act that was set to music, or you could become a comedy magician. And I had no interest in doing like a card manipulation act or a billiard ball manipulation act or thimbles or whatever the thing was. That just didn't really interest me. And so I thought, okay, well then that the other path is the one I'll have to take. I'll become a comedy magician. And so I developed a comedy magic act, and by the time I was in my late teens and early 20s, I was performing magic in comedy clubs, and it was a miserable experience. It was an important lesson ultimately. It was a lesson about finding your environment, finding the place where you can thrive. And comedy clubs were not the place where I could thrive. It was basically the game there was pander or die.
Mm.
So I died over and over and over. And then I had the realization, if I continue on this path, I'm going to start to resent magic. It's going to lose its sparkle, its fun for me. And so I thought, I have to leave this path. I have to find a new way. And it occurred to me that, Tony Andruzzi, having attended the invocational conferences in Chicago in the 80s, he was a successful comedy magician. He created the Tom Palmer Comedy Act, which is the manuscript for it is probably still sold by Magic Incorporated in Chicago. And he was very successful at it as a nightclub entertainer. And then he, at some point, decided he had gone far enough along that path, and he abandoned it. And he created this other persona, masculine Yu Mage, and began performing bizarre magic. And he struck off on this new, weirder path that would be more satisfying to him. So, in a sense, having met Tony and seen him perform made me realize on an unconscious level that I had permission to do that I could leave the path I was on that was making me unhappy and find a new path. And so that's what I did.
So, and it was kind of easy for you, if I remember correctly, because you transitioning into a narrative-based magic, because you were always kind of into weird stuff anyway.
Yes, but it wasn't easy in the sense that all I had was a comedy act. It was the act I had developed over years, and I realized, okay, I have to go scorched earth on this. I have to burn this to the ground and start over. And that was terrifying because I didn't have another act. So when I trashed the comedy act, and I realized I had to trash it in its entirety, because if I retained any piece of it, I felt like I would backslide and just go back to doing the comedy act. So I felt like, okay, I have to go scorched earth on this. So I threw away or gave away all of the props that were involved in it. I gave some of the gags that were in it to friends and said, here, you use it. I won't.
Any regrets on that?
What's that?
Any regrets on anything you gave away?
No, No,
No.
not at all. Because it's now when I look back on that act, it's like a different person. If when I
Hmm.
look at it, it's like that seems like a different person. I'm not that person anymore. Um, so there's no way I could ever go back to it. It seems so foreign to me now. But at the time, it was really terrifying. I was completely obliterating everything I'd worked on for the past years and starting all over. And it was only, facing that terror and going, okay, now what do? I need to create an act from scratch. That's when I started asking myself, well, where are my interests? What am I into? Like, and what I realized was that it was spooky stuff. It had always been spooky stuff ever since I was a kid. And you know,
Yeah,
um,
that's what I meant. That was the easy
yeah, yeah.
where
Once
the
I
cool.
had that realization of, oh, my interest in magic was entwined with my interest in monster movies and ghost stories and murder mysteries and all that stuff, all the spooky, weird stuff that I loved as a kid. That realization, it was like, oh, now the path is clear. The path is I move in the direction of weirdness.
And do you think your show became more sincere after that?
Oh, absolutely, because then it was a genuine expression of me. I mean, up to that point, it was me emulating my heroes in magic, like mainly Doug Henning,
Hmm.
down to doing some of the same material. um, and so after that point, it was like, well, now it's an expression of me and who I am, an expression of my interests and obsessions, right?
Hmm.
Uh,
Now, even so during something I just thought of, I don't know if I ever asked you this before, is during that transitional period where you're going from comedy to spookier stuff, not necessarily always bizarre, except it's unique and original and um, you
and
know,
narratively driven.
and narratively driven. But yeah, in that respect, it is. But when you're making that transition, um, how long was it before you did completely? Because all your stuff right now is completely yours. It's you write your own scripts, you put your own spin on classic magic. So in that way, it's your narrative, your story. But was there a point where you're like, well, this, I just found this script here that from this person in Bizarre Magic who does this, and I'll see how this flies. Did you do any other scripted materials or off the shelf or produced products
I mean, I did when I was young. I
Yeah.
did when I was really young because I didn't know there was another way to do it.
Hmm.
It was like basically do this the way the instructions described. Or I'd pick up Doug Henning's presentation for it and do that.
Hmm.
But later on, it was like, well, what do I have to say? You know, I mean, I think there were two keys to finding my own creative voice. One was the decision that I was going to script all of my material, like to have an actual written script. Because and the way you start to write a script is you just you do the show you normally do and transcribe it.
Hmm.
And what happens is when you look at the transcription on the page, you suddenly notice like all the sentences that don't make sense, the like non sentences, all the like verbal ticks, all that stuff becomes glaringly apparent when you can see it in black and white. And that's part of why it's so useful to have a written script, because you can see all the problems and then they're easy to fix. um, but making the decision to have an actual literal written script for every piece of magic that I do forced me to really consider, what do I have to say? What do I have to say to my audience? If I'm asking for their time and attention, and sometimes their money, what do I have to say to them? what information do I have to convey? So that was one of the keys, I think. The other key was that I made a conscious decision to stop comparing myself to other performers. Something in my brain made me realize that comparison was unhealthy for me. And it was because I realized that when I compared myself to my heroes in Magic, like let's say Doug Henning, I realized I can never be him. I can't be him. Try as hard as I might, I could never be him. And so I would always fail. It was a task at which I was guaranteed to fail. And so I realized that comparing myself to anybody else was unhealthy. And so I stopped. I literally stopped. I made myself stop. And that, I think, was another key to, well, what do I have to say? What do I have to say now that I'm on my own and not comparing myself to anybody else? And those helped me evolve a voice.
Yeah. And at what point did you start giving back, like writing for? You wrote, multiple books, and which eventually became digitized at some points. At what point did you start doing that, and when you started putting out material and giving back to the community?
I think the first I wrote a set of lecture notes that was called Brain Food.
Mm-hmm.
And it was printed up on my computer, like an old Apple computer, and it was replete with typos and awkward sentences. Like every once in a while, when I'm doing a magic lecture at a convention or whatever, someone will come up with the original lecture note version of Brain Food and ask me to sign it. And what I want to do is take it away and never give it back because it's so cringy to me. So I eventually got a do-over in that Stephen Minch gave me the opportunity to basically rewrite that book and expand it into the version of Brain Food that was published later. But it was 1992. I had written that set of lecture notes because I was going to be giving a lecture at the Magic Castle in Hollywood. And it was one of my first ever magic lectures. And I thought, well, I should have lecture notes because that's what you have at a magic lecture. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote up this thing and printed it up myself. And I printed, I don't know how many copies of it. And I was going to sell it at the lecture. Well, as it turned out, it was the year of, and the exactly coincided with the LA riots.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I was there for the LA riots. This was after the Rodney King trial. And when Hollywood, where LA was just consumed in this conflagration of violence and craziness. And basically the city was under martial law. Like you were supposed to be off the streets by a certain time. There was a curfew. And so my time at the Magic Castle was cut short by this whole thing. By the time I was supposed to give the lecture, we were allowed to do that because it was in the afternoon. So, but we were on a strict time limit. It was like I kept glancing at the time and thinking we need to wrap this up because we've all got to be off the streets. Mm-hmm. And so the whole experience was very weird. And I ended up I think I maybe sold 2 copies of the lecture notes there. So I had this whole stack of them printed up, and I maybe sold a couple of copies, and that was it. But every once in a while, the last time I was at the Magic Castle, I went down to the library, and we found a copy of the lecture notes that I had signed. At that time, T.A. Waters was the castle librarian. So wow. I signed it for T.A. Waters, and then I'd signed another copy specifically just for him. and it's in the castle library. The crappy original version of Brain Food is in there. I wanted to take it away, but I thought, okay, for historical preservation, okay, it can stay. So the answer to your question is about 1992.
Wow. So as you can see, we have a question from Mr. TC Tahoe. Has music inspired any of your magic?
I'll tell you, it has in a way, and that's because the first major rock concert I ever went to when I was in 7th grade was Alice Cooper. And at that time, what I knew was that there was magic in his stage show. He would perform the guillotine in his show, and there was even a version of the old film to life illusion, and that was that the set of the Alice Cooper's stage looked like a giant television screen, and there were points in between songs where commercials would play, and then Alice would be on the screen, and then it looked like he and the other band members and stuff jumped out of the screen and suddenly came to life. And so that was, or they jumped into the screen and became part of the video that was showing on it. And that happened a number of times during the show. He was also doing it was like a stack of boxes illusion, where somebody went into the stack of boxes and then they were knocked over and the person had vanished. So there was a bunch of magic in his show, and that was definitely an influence. I mean, because it was spooky magic. So yeah, that was, so my earliest influences in magic were at opposite ends of the spectrum. There was Doug Henning with The World Is All Puppies and Rainbows and Unicorns. And then there was Alice Cooper with this very dark, murderous character who could also do magic. So that's how I've been ever since. It's opposites.
Wow.
Were you getting a message from Beyond the Veil, Vince?
I was, yes. It was yep, they were letting me know that it's that was a good question, I suppose. I didn't have a good comeback for that question, so we'll have to work with that one. But so 1992, your first big contribution is Brain Food. And you've since added to that, and it's available on your website, which I put in the linkage for the description, that sort of thing. And by the way, in case you didn't see it earlier, please feel free to ask questions and contribute at any time about anything. Say hi to us. Try to keep it professional. Of course, yeah.
Now that's a tall order.
But and so the what and so you've done lectures, you've done workshops, how did the first performance that is considered a career high for a lot of magicians, maybe not so much this year, but to perform at the Magic Castle, how did that come about? How did you get that gig?
It was a very strange circumstance, and now looking back, it was like I wasn't ready for it. I was not ready for it. But I was out visiting Eugene Berger in Chicago, and we were sitting chatting, and he was talking with Bill Larson on the phone, and suddenly he said to Bill, "Oh, I have my friend David Parr is here. He'd like to perform at the castle." And he handed the phone to me. So now I'm on the phone with Bill Larson, and we're arranging for me to perform at the castle. Like, now I couldn't say no. I mean,
Yeah.
because he dropped this opportunity in my lap. So of course I was like, okay, great. So I scheduled to go perform at the castle.
I don't
And
think it works like that anymore.
no, hell no. Hell no. So, but honestly, I was not ready for it, and it was not a good experience. It was not a pleasant experience because I was too young and too inexperienced. I just wasn't ready, and um, so I performed there, and I performed there a couple of times actually, and then the last time was the LA riots,
Mhm.
and I was like, that whole experience was so disturbing and unfun that I was like, I think I'm done with LA for a while. I don't think I want to go back. It kind of just soured me on all of it. And so I actually did not go back to the castle or LA for 25 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
But eventually you did perform there again.
Yes, I did. And it was only because friends started asking me, why aren't you performing at the castle? And I was like, well, everyone I knew there who booked me years ago is dead now.
Mm.
Like, I don't have any contacts there. I was like, I don't think I can get booked there, to be honest with you. And people like Christian Cagigal were like, come on, David, of course you can get booked at the castle. So he kept encouraging me to. It still took me like 2 years of cajoling to finally get them to book me. Like it's literally 2 years of regularly sending emails to say, hey, here's what I'm up to now. Would love to get out there and visit and perform. And like 2 years of that before they finally booked me. And it just happened to be like almost exactly the 25th anniversary of when I had been there.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was weird, and it was a far more positive experience that time around because I was ready for it. You know, I've had my books out, and people know about my work, and so people came in specifically to see me, and it was good. It was good. The first time around, I felt lost there. I
Mhm.
just wasn't ready for it.
So, so we have another question, and I think there's a couple of ways to interpret this. So let's do a two-part answer. What's your favorite bizarre magic effect? So I think the first way of putting it would be, who did you see do a really good bizarre magic effect that you liked? And then we'll see, and maybe you could say something that you've done that is bizarre-ish, as a would be considered bizarre magic. So first one is someone else performing it that you really liked, and then the second one would be something you've done that would fall within that category, I suppose.
In the category of bizarre, that's tough. I mean, um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I saw performers do stuff certain effects when I was young that stayed in my mind. Like one example of that is the routine, the effect flexible glass, which was invented in the 1920s, and I remember seeing Doug Henning do it, and it's an effect where a glass mirror in a frame is knocked on to determine that solid. Then it's placed inside of a cloth bag, and then
Mhm.
he took a knitting needle and stuck the needle through the mirror several times, like poke, 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 and it went right through. And then he took the mirror and bent it in half and straightened it, and then pulled the mirror out of the bag, and it was unbroken. And that image of the eeriness of seeing the mirror bent in half, it's kind of like Salvador Dali's drooping watches in the
Uh-huh.
Brilliance of Time painting. That image is so memorable, so arresting that it stayed with me. even to when I was a grown up. And every once in a while, I think that image would come back to me and I'd think about it. So finally, as a grown up, I thought, I need to do that effect. I think I need to perform it. It's one of the things it's a cherished memory from when I was young. And so I started working on a presentation for it. And you've seen me perform that effect.
Oh yeah, very well. As a matter of fact, it's a great spin on it. Of course, I'm sure both of us have seen that perform badly.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I put a bizarre presentation on it. It's all about the folklore and magical beliefs about mirrors. And mirrors, when they were first invented, were kind of viewed with suspicion and dread because they were so strange. The effect of them was so strange that so all this folklore built up around them. I think you'd be hard pressed to find another object in the average household that has more folklore and magical belief attached to it than a mirror.
Mm-hmm.
And in fairy tales, mirror, mirror on the wall.
Superstitions too. I mean, breaking a mirror, bringing a body out. So
right, mirrors should be covered when a death occurs in the house. Two people shouldn't gaze in the mirror. It's bad luck for two people to gaze into the mirror at the same time. Mm-hmm. All that folklore. So that's what went into my presentation for that effect. So that's an example of an effect I saw when I was young and kind of fell in love with, and then decided, well, I have to perform this. It feels like fate, But I can't think of a specific bizarre magic example.
Well, you've been to a couple of invocationals. How many did you go to?
Actually? I went to all of them.
All of them, okay.
Yeah, this was during my comedy club days, and my friend John Hewitt had written a couple of things for the magazine, for Invocation magazine, and he was kind of sort of buddies with Tony, and so he asked me to go. He was like, I want to go to this weird magic convention in Chicago, but I don't want to go by myself. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll go. Even though I wasn't into it, I went along. And I went all during the convention. I thought, this is weird. I don't quite get this. Like, what are these people doing? But I went back the next year. And I went back the year after that, and I went back the year after that. I went to all 7 conferences. So something in it was getting through to a part of my brain. There was an appeal there, and I think it was what I was describing earlier: the idea that Tony gave me permission to abandon the path that was making me unhappy and find a new, weirder one. And so I think that was the appeal. And so being, and it was the first time I saw like Max Maven perform, and lots of other people I'd never encountered before. I got to see there, and so all of that was having an unconscious effect on me. And it was only in retrospect where I look back and realized how profoundly just being able to hang around Tony had been. And so, all that kind of added up to, oh, okay, I get it now. This is, I can be as weird as I want to be. And there's a place for me, Where can we see your routine? Oh, for Flexible Glass?
I assume as much, yeah.
I think it's on my YouTube channel. Right. It was recorded at one of my Halloween shows that took place in an old mansion just outside of Chicago that's now a museum.
Or you could see it at posemagic.com in an upcoming performance eventually.
My Halloween show.
Yeah, your Halloween show, but you'll probably bring it back at some point, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So yeah, so David, he changes every time you see the Sorcerer's Lair on Poe's Magic. He changes the set list.
Yeah.
So every time you see it, you'll see something different, and a lot of times you'll see something new as well. So it's never the same show.
Like
You only seen it once.
a bit so that there's a few surprises for people who've seen the show before. So I'll throw in at least one or two new things, and then stuff from past shows that I've retired, and then I'll do them again. And I did the flexible glass for Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a little odd, like doing it for the camera, because like when you turn the mirror toward the computer screen that's in front of me, you get a recursive effect where it's the endless series of Davids in the mirror, which is kind of fun. Yeah. Now, what was that message that just came up? I missed it.
All right. So it was one thing I've always been impressed with is David's ease of presence on the stage. It appears natural, which truly shows his professionalism.
That's a thing that comes from being comfortable in your skin, and it's actually a realization I had as an actor when I was doing roles in plays. I had at some point I realized the more of myself I bring to this role, the happier everyone's going to be. And by everyone, I mean the director, because the director cast me in the show because she saw some qualities in me that she wanted me to bring to that role. And if she wanted someone else with different qualities, she would have cast somebody else in that role.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it meant I didn't have to pretend to be someone I'm not. The task was to bring myself to the role. And then the audience would be happier because they'd sense the sincerity of my performance because I was genuinely bringing myself to it. And I would be happier because I wouldn't be all nervous and trying to figure out, well, who does the director want me to be? Who does the audience expect me to be? It just relieved me of all that nervousness and doubt. And I could just be comfortable in my skin and be myself. And that realization made the task of acting so much easier and more fun, more enjoyable, because I could relax. And then I realized, this also applies to magic. Mm-hmm. If I bring myself to the task of performing magic, I can just relax and be me and communicate with the audience. They'll sense that I'm being sincere, so they'll connect with me as a performer and as a person, and we can all have fun together. And so I think that realization, the more of myself I bring to this task, the happier everyone will be, was a pivotal one, because it relieved me of so much doubt and nerves.
And for magicians who are trying to break into magic and be successful full-time magicians, good advice is to mention the fact that you don't see the most popular magicians in the world, the most successful ones, pretending to be someone else.
It just to me, that's putting an obstacle between me and my audience and making it more difficult for me to connect with them. If they sense falseness, and I think we all have an inner radar that detects falseness, and if they get the sense that my onstage persona is a put on, it's going to be very difficult for me to establish a relationship with those people, especially in the limited time we have together. Our time together is limited. So I need to forge a connection with them. And the shortest path, the surest path to it is to be sincere, to be who I am.
Persona-wise, was there a difference between Masculine Image and Tony Andruzzi?
No, they were the same guy. Yeah. Both of them had Tony's impish sense of humor. Both of them were, drunk a lot of the time. Both of them, could be very serious about things that were absurd. Masculine was just Tony wearing a robe, It was just Tony dressed up.
Well, I think I know who our audience is today. Here's another question for you.
What is this? Who has been amongst your greatest influences within the bizarre magic community? Well, first, Tony. I mean, Tony was the one who, just on an unconscious level gave me permission to stop being a comedy magician and stop pursuing that disastrous path that was making me so miserable and strike off on a new one. And but also Eugene Berger, who I met in my first year of college. And I considered him like a crossover artist. He was performing magic in mainstream contexts, like at a company party or in a restaurant. But he was doing magic that was a little bit weird, and it was, one of the criticisms I remember hearing of bizarre magic early on was, well, there's no place to perform it. And Eugene Berger was the proof that was wrong.
Yeah.
Because he was doing weird stuff, but he was doing it in a mainstream context. And so it was like, well, no, that idea that you can't perform that material anywhere it's just incorrect.
Yeah, it seems to be a weird mindset, doesn't it? Where it's a self-defeatist attitude of.
Yeah, well, and it's a denial of reality, quite honestly. And especially now in a post-Harry Potter world where, mainstream entertainment now contains all this comic book references and geek culture the geeks have inherited the earth. So like to say that you can't do weird stuff and even in a mainstream context is just, you've got some catching up to do if that's your attitude, honestly. So yeah, I think Eugene and Tony were huge influences early on. Yeah, as was Alice Cooper. That was his concert was essentially a big, lavish magic show with this weird psychotic character at the head of it as the star, and who was symbolically killed and resurrected during his show. His head was chopped off. They paraded around with his severed head. And then in the next song, he was suddenly alive again. I mean, it was literally a death and resurrection show. Mm-hmm. There's a fantastic book by that title that applies to that analyzes that. It was also my first introduction to the invocational conventions, was my first introduction to Max Maven. And one of the things that struck me about Max's work that I noticed almost immediately was the clarity of his instructions to onstage assistants. Like when he got someone from the audience and explained to them what they were expected to do, it was crystal clear so that the person wouldn't mess it all up. And I had seen that go so wrong for so many magicians, where it was like the person on stage with the magician had no idea what their role was supposed to be and didn't understand what the instructions were. And then the whole thing went off the rails. But with Max, everything was so precise and clear. And I think that was one of the things I learned from him, from watching him perform, was that clarity and precision. So there's just a few major influences on me. There's more, and they're all still present in my work. There's some expression of all those people, including Alice Cooper and including Vincent Price and including Christopher Lee and all those performers I admired when I was a kid. There's still some of them in my work, and that's as it should be.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's the big misinterpretation of bizarre magic, of course, is it's always spooky. It's always horror related. I literally was in a workshop last year, which someone who definitely should have known better to refer to it specifically as horror. No names being mentioned. We've described it as that, and I made a point to raise my hand in that one and do a correction. But it's about being unique and different, theatrical, narrative driven, and anyone who can incorporate that into their performance is a bizarrist. And truth be told, the aspect of story. And this is leading into a question, question for you. The aspect of the story resonates with people. Metaphors and storytelling connects with your audience.
There's no more powerful tool
Yeah.
for connecting with an audience than narrative.
Mhm.
We are human beings are built to respond to a story. It's how we understand the world around us. And our memories are stories that we tell ourselves and tell others.
Mhm.
So there's no quicker tool to use to connect with an audience than narrative, because we can't help but respond to it. We're programmed to, evolutionarily speaking, and so yeah, I'd make full use of it. Um, it's but here's the thing. I think the part of the problem with bizarre magic, one of the pitfalls of bizarre magic, is that when the emphasis is on story to the exclusion of everything else, the elements of the performance get out of balance.
Mhm.
And so what you find sometimes is that the the piece of magic is front loaded with tons of narrative, and then the effect that happens at the end of it doesn't justify that massive front loading of narrative, and so the whole thing collapses under its own weight. And
Yeah.
so it's like, my goal in magic is for all of the elements of the performance to support one another, to be in balance with one another. And so narrative, technique, presentation, all of that stuff should all be in balance, in harmony.
I'm sorry I didn't have a yin yang graphic to pop up at that
Yeah,
moment.
yeah. I'm using my hands. That's what I do all the time. I can't not talk with my hands. The first time I watched my Penguin Live lecture, watched the video of it, I was like, "Oh, holy crap! I'm talking with my hands through this whole thing." I was kind of alarmed by how much of it was. I was like, I warned people, like my friends. I was like, "Okay, before you watch this, be prepared to spend 2.5 hours with someone who talks with his hands." Like, it was kind of startling to me.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, but you're absolutely correct. It has to have a balance. It's how many times have you seen magicians, even non-bizarrists, who try to have a story element to their show, where the show would just be better if they could tell the story while performing the illusion, as opposed to it's several minutes of this, and then trick at
Or
the
if they just shut up and get out of the way.
end. Yeah.
The example I tell often is, I was going to perform in a theater festival in Chicago. I'd been booked to perform for this theater festival, and I wanted to write a new piece for it. So I took the old Broken and Restored thread effect, and I wrote this script for it. And it was kind of like, it was a fable in the Arthurian legend mode. There was a wizard, and there was a king, and there was all this stuff. And I wrote this script, and the night before the show, before the festival opened, I was rehearsing it, and I was rehearsing it in front of a mirror. So I was running through this routine, and at some point during the routine, some part of my brain asked myself, is this script really enhancing this magic effect? And when I was honest with myself, the answer was no.
Mm.
And it was because that effect is one of those rare magic effects where the more closely you look at it, the more baffling it is. So I thought all these words I'm saying, blah, 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 are just getting in the way of people being able to focus and appreciate how beautiful this effect is. Just, I mean, watching it in the mirror was even fascinating, and I know how it's done. Right. So I was like, I had the sudden realization that the words I had added to it were an obstacle between my audience and the experience of that effect. So I thought, you know what? I am going to crush up this script. I literally crushed up the script I had printed and threw it in the garbage. And then I deleted it from my computer just as a way to as a statement to myself, like, no backsliding. I am deleting this for good.
Mm.
And the following night, I performed it silently in the show. I performed that effect in the middle of the show as a silent piece. And it was funny because that night, Bob Neal happened to be in the audience. He was visiting Chicago, and he happened to find out about my show, and he came to see it. And after the show, Bob said, my favorite part was the broken and restored thread. Like, when did you come up with the idea to just do it silently like that? And I was like, last night at about 3 a.m. And I was like, because I had written this whole script for it, and I just had the realization that it wasn't enhancing. It was just getting in the way. So sometimes that's the case where words will not make it better.
Yeah. 100 years from now, there's going to be a magic historian pulling his hair out when he hears that you deleted it
Yeah,
as a reference point. Like, I would have liked to have known what it could have been.
yeah, no, I felt like I had to prove to myself that I meant that with complete conviction that I was not going to use that script. So it was like a symbolic gesture to myself to just not only throw the physical script in the garbage, but to delete it from my computer. Because sometimes I, feel like I have to make a statement. But it's sometimes the job of the artist is to get out of the way, to get out of the way, and part of developing an instinct as an artist is to know when that's the case, to be able to recognize it.
So let's see. So you were suggesting that one would be better off performing multiple effects while storytelling versus front loading the story for a single effect.
Not necessarily. I mean, there are certainly pieces that are like that. There are pieces in my repertoire that are like that, where there's a main effect, and then there are like little effects that are on the way to the main effect. And that's kind of fun because it has a build to it, right? A little mystery happens, and another little mystery, and then a big mystery happens, and that's kind of fun. But not all of my material is structured that way. I mean, it's different every time. The creative process is different every time. These things grow and develop differently every time, and if my entire show were structured on that formula, it wouldn't be a very interesting show. After a while, the audience would get, oh, here's the formula, right? They know what to expect. I mean, by the same token, having learned that lesson with that piece I threw the script in the garbage with, I every once in a while challenge myself to perform magic with as few words as possible. As enamored as I am of language, I love language. I mean, you can tell my work is very verbally oriented. but every once in a while, I think it's a good exercise to challenge myself to not do that, to do a piece that's silent or nearly silent. I mean, the piece I did on Fool Us the first time has like one very brief paragraph of dialogue, and then there's no talking throughout the rest of it. It's all just a silent game. So I think that's a good exercise to just to step outside your normal mode of expression and to try and do something that's kind of the opposite of that. And
So one of my favorite tricks. It really is.
and that's happened with a few things. My version of the razor blade swallowing thing, the needle mystery, but done with the razor blades. Most of that routine, aside from a brief introduction, most of that routine is silent, and then the audience listening to me crunch on an apple. And I mean, part of that is, if I'm going to ask my audience to listen to me talk for an hour, I don't want them to get tired of the sound of my voice. So I like to build into the show, somewhere in the middle of the show, a brief moment, some moment where they don't have to listen to the sound of my voice, where they get a break from listening to my voice. And I think that's necessary in a show of that length.
So to be a bit more crude, magic does not have to be the punchline in a script.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think there are times when that can work, but there are times when that's not the best approach. Yeah, I mean, there's like, I tend to open shows with something that doesn't require a lot of introduction, that gets into the magic part of it pretty quickly, and that's part of that is I feel like up front at the beginning of my show, I have to prove to my audience that, one, I'm competent and know what I'm doing, right? So that they can trust me, that they can trust that, oh, this show is not going to be a disaster to watch. This guy knows what he's doing. So I try to do that right up front in the show. So there's some solid visual magic right up front. And then the other thing I have to prove to them is that I'm an interesting person. Yeah. So I try to do that right up front in the beginning of the show, and then we can get on with more complex things that are more narrative, that have more narrative involved in them. Yeah. But early on, I think it's important to prove, yeah, I'm a magician and I'm good at what I do. So you can trust that you're in good hands here. You didn't waste the money you spent on that ticket.
Yep, Isabel said hi, by the way.
Hi, Isabel.
Yep.
Yay. Yeah.
So we've had a lot of discussions about the history of magic. I think you probably consider yourself at least a little bit of an amateur magic historian. And how magic has evolved over the years, the centuries, truth be told, and became what it is today. How do you think, in the golden age of magic, how do you think that compares to today, as far as structure and performance is concerned?
Well, I think the main difference with the golden age of magic, and we're talking between the 1850s and the 1950s, right?
Yes.
Is that those audiences were educated audiences, in the sense that they had seen more than one magic show live. They'd seen more than one play and more than one opera. I mean, the people who were going to theater were well versed in theater because that's what they did for entertainment. Yeah. But I mean, so it's a very different audience with different expectations and different understanding than an audience nowadays who probably has never seen a live magic show. I mean, we used to ask, when I was doing my show in a theater in Chicago for 10 years, we would ask the audience, how many people, how many of you is this your first live magic show? And at least half the audience was raising their hand. So for those people, we got to define what the experience of a live magic show was, which is on the one hand a bit terrifying because it's a huge responsibility to be defining that for people. But on the other hand, it was a tremendous opportunity. Like we get to show them what this is, and they're going to enjoy this and want more. So they'll be back. So the audience was different back in the golden age, I think.
Well, yeah, the performances were in an evening. I mean, you went
like literally
the evening. Yeah, I can't even
hours.
imagine. Yeah, hours. Yeah, three. Yeah. I mean, I think Thurston's shows, and that was even later. I mean, comparatively, it was late in the golden age. Thurston's shows were 3 hours long, but other performers had shows that were longer still.
Sure.
I mean, you went there at 7:00. You went home at midnight.
Yeah, they were literally an evening show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They had intermissions.
Hearing that phrase when I was growing up, the full evening show, and not understanding what it really meant, that it meant that literally. But I remember, yeah, he had a full evening show.
Mm-hmm. It was an intermission where people would walk away, go into the lobby, get entertained by the equivalent of supposedly strolling magicians, but also other entertainment.
Yeah.
Have hors d'oeuvres and champagne, then go back in.
Yeah, have a snack to fortify yourself for the next part of the show.
The second half of the evening. That's right.
Yeah,
go to the bathroom.
I mean, if you think about a vaudeville show, like it was, there would be 10 performers on the bill.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they each do like not 10 minutes. They do a substantial act, and then there'd be another and another and another. And so you settled in for a night at the theater. Mm-hmm. And so I think that made the game very different from the game we're in now. Now it's interesting because we're getting an educated audience in a different way now, and it's educated through television and the internet. So like when I was performing the piece that I did on Fool Us the first time in my Cabinet of Curiosities show, and I would say, how many of you saw me on Penn and Teller Fool Us? And lots of people were raising their hand. So that show and shows like it have a huge fan base of non-magicians, just people who love magic and are not magicians themselves. And they were coming to see my show. So that audience is educated in a sense that they weren't when I was performing magic shows when I was a teenager. Those people weren't educated about magic. I've actually noticed the language that non-magicians use is changing, because I've heard people say, and these are non-magicians, say things like, I really love close-up magic. Now, the phrase close-up magic is a phrase no one but a magician would have ever said while I was growing up.
Yep.
Only a magician would have ever used that phrase. But now I've heard non-magicians use that phrase, and I've even heard them use the phrase bizarre magic.
Oh, wow.
Because they've seen it on AGT or Penn and Teller Fool Us or BGT. And so now they're familiar with that terminology. And what that does is it's educated them to the fact that there is a wide variety of styles and approaches to magic, that not all magic or all magicians are cut from the same cloth. And the audience's awareness that there are different styles and approaches is all to the good. It's really fun to perform for an audience that's educated about magic and how diverse it can be when it's done thoughtfully.
Yeah, the magic subgenre of mentalism, and I describe it like that just to bother mentalists. Um, is actually the mentalism actually made its way into mainstream as early as the '80s with the TV series with Bill Bixby, of course, and
Right.
later on there was another show called The Mentalist, but yeah, it was these terms are getting mainstream. People are starting to become more aware.
Right. No one when I was growing up would have even known that the word mentalist existed. It
Mhm.
was just not a word that anyone would use normally. But after that TV show, like, it's in the popular lexicon. You can now use that word in public, and people won't look at you like, what is that?
One of the strangest things I think made it into the public consciousness was what we call magic with a K, and that's thanks to comic books to some degree.
Yeah.
There's lots of influences there. The Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman to some degree, and other similar artists.
Grant Morrison.
Grant Morrison for sure. Yeah, some of them are insane, but
They're kooky. It's a harmless kind of kooky, I think.
kooky.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean insanity in a positive way, absolutely. But
Yeah. It's an imaginative play. I see it as.
mm,
Oh yeah, Kreskin too. I yeah, I never even thought about that.
yeah,
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, it's we're now dealing with an audience that is becoming increasingly educated because they've seen, but not about the experience of magic in person. For many people, their only experience of magic is on television or the internet, and so actually getting to see an in-person performance for them is like a new thing.
yeah. We're living in the era of the Zoom magic show currently.
Yes, so we're back to magic on a screen and the possibilities that presents.
Mhm.
Um, and that's been a challenge, but it's also been a creative. It's been a great creative time for me. I think I've created more new material than I have in a shorter period than almost any other time in my career,
Mhm.
and it's because I had to. This is the reality in which we're living, and that there was no other choice. I had to. If I was to move forward, I had to explore this new world.
Yeah, likewise. I wrote 3 new ebooks this year, which I think you've read.
Yes, yeah,
And I just finished 2 scripts for Christopher Taylor for his new Night's Eye effect. But yeah, I probably wouldn't have been that busy with that if it weren't for the situation. Hopefully, we'll be out of very soon.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's been an interesting learning experience, and one of my touchstones in this entire process was in asking myself how can I connect with people across the screen. I thought back to those Doug Henning magic specials I watched when I was a kid, and how profoundly those affected me. It seemed like he was talking to me. When he spoke to the camera, it felt like he was talking to me.
Mhm.
And so what I realize now is that sincerity was the engine that made that function. And so I think that was the key, to being able to connect with someone across a television screen or any kind of screen, was to be able to look at that camera and talk to it as if it's a friend of mine, sincerely.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it didn't. Thinking back on those Henning specials made me realize, oh, this isn't an impossible task. I can do this because he connected with me across the screen.
Well, I think that's we went just over an hour.
Oh, really?
Yep. Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
Feels like
And
we're just getting started.
yep. And we had we had at the height of our live stream here, and then people pop in and out. We had 20 people watching, which is a good turnout for these. And of course, later on through reminding everyone, some of you may know this already, these videos will be up forever. You can rewatch this again if you came in late. you can go back and take a look at it.
So they can find it on Facebook and they can find it on YouTube.
That is correct. Yep, Pose Magic Academy on Facebook and Pose Magic, our mainstream for the theater on YouTube. So we will be making a announcement about Pose Magic Academy at some point in the near future. I don't want to get out.
You know, we live in an age of wonders that we have technology that enables us to do this. I mean, consider what it must have been like for people during the 1918 pandemic. Like, people must have felt really isolated and been really isolated.
I don't think they even had radio at that point yet. Yeah.
Like, to stay connected with one another. And this is, Arthur C. Clarke was right. He wrote that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I think that's true. We have this, we do live in an age of wonders as far as communication is concerned, and we can all take advantage of this. So this will be up on the interwebs for you to enjoy or ignore.
Yep. Yeah. Just and feel free, of course, to post questions in there and reach out to us at any point if you have any follow-up questions you didn't think of at the time.
Oh yeah, I'm super accessible. I'm on Facebook and Insta and all that stuff. And so if you want to communicate with me, send me an email, send me a message on some platform, and I'm happy to chat about magic because there's almost nothing I enjoy doing more. I could chat about magic all day.
I know from experience.
Yeah, exactly.
And likewise. And of course, where can there we go. Where can they see you next, David Parr?
This Saturday, the Sorcerer's Lair returns for the first show of the new year. It's this Saturday at is it 6 p.m. Central?
Yeah, 6 p.m. Central. That's right. Yep.
Central, 7 p.m. Eastern. Go to Pose Magic for any info on that.
Yep, I will put links in the chat room. Just go to Pose. There we go. PoseMagic.com.
Yeah.
You get a link right on the main page. Just scroll down a little bit. It's right there. It's pay what you can. We understand that times are tough right now, and that everyone is struggling a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's pay what you can. People on average pay about $10, but that's not an obligation. It's just a suggestion. I mean, you can get in there for $1 if you'd like. And we understand that times are tough, and we want to support everyone to have a chance to see wonderful entertainment.
Is that people who could afford to be generous have been generous?
Yes, they have.
That's fantastic.
Yep.
So it just, I felt like it was important to make the show accessible to everyone. I don't want people to be excluded because they might not be able to afford it. It should be accessible to everyone.
Yep, and you can support David and Pose Magic by signing up, and it encourages us to do more of these, of course, and do things with Pose Magic Academy. So please go to the links, sign up for this show on Saturday. It's super easy to sign up
for your newsletter, so you know what's coming up on the schedule.
Exactly. There's a newsletter. There's a post. There's a subscription. 2 newsletters you can sign up. One is is our newsletter, which has interesting information about upcoming events, trivia, among other things. And there's also a sign up where you can find out posts for new updates on the shows. And you also get added to a newsletter if you'd like. All these are optional and choice. You can sign up for all of them or one of them. Each one has different tidbits information in it. One is just for shows. One's for Pose Magic. The other one's for the main newsletter for the website, which has the trivia and questions and murder mysteries occasionally get featured in there. So we have a lot coming up. There's more magicians soon to come at Pose Magic, but this Saturday is our guest tonight, David Parr. I hope to see you on Saturday.
Yeah,
that's right. More.
Yeah.
That's right. So thank you everyone for coming. And don't forget, you can rewatch this at any point you want to. Go to posemagic.com and follow us everywhere at PoseMagic on social media. And check out that mysterious Facebook page, Pose Magic Academy. We'll be adding some things to that very, very soon. All right. Talk to you soon, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.